She stood there on the rough wooden wagon like a beast of burden, her head hooded under a coarse sack, feet raw and bleeding against the splintered planks beneath her. The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on her back, searing her skin, making every breath heavy and dry in the dust-choked air. Around her, the crowd was a brutal mix of hardened old men with necks sunburnt and cracked, their voices thick with the stench of whiskey and cruelty, and ragged youth whose dusty boots kicked dirt and whose soulless eyes held no mercy. $1, the auctioneer bellowed, his voice thick with mockery and venom, the words slicing the silence like a whip. A real savage, yours forever. His laughter, cruel and hollow, echoed through the square, bouncing off weathered buildings, swallowed by the cracked earth. Caleb Morgan stood on the outskirts of that broken congregation, his heart pounding like a war drum beneath his ribs. He had borne witness to darkness before, in the muddy carnage of Gettysburg, in the hollow eyes of dying boys who once dreamed of a future. But this? This was a darkness not shrouded by the fog of battle, but paraded openly for all to see and mock. It was evil displayed in broad daylight, with laughter ringing as its soundtrack. The woman faltered, knees buckling under the weight of shame and agony, and that moment, the faltering step was all Caleb needed. Quiet, low, and flat, he called out, $1. The crowd fell into a stunned silence, as if struck by a sudden blow. The auctioneer, taken aback, smirked and barked, sold to the lonely farmer. With steady hands that concealed the storm inside him, Caleb climbed the wagon, his boots crunching on the rough wood. He cut the ropes binding her wrists, the coarse fibers resisting before giving way. Pulling off the sack, he braced for a broken woman, hollowed by suffering, stripped of hope, but what met his eyes was something far fiercer, defiance blazing like burning embers. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, locked onto his with a strength that refused to be dimmed. Her shoulders squared, bearing the weight of her torment without bowing, that gaze haunted Caleb's nights to come, the unbroken spirit that refused to be claimed. Caleb Morgan was no hero by choice. He was a man marked by loss and war, a widower who had buried his grief deep in the unforgiving soil of the frontier. 7 years had passed since the war had taken from him everything he loved, his wife, his son, and the fragile peace he once sought. He had wrapped himself in silence, retreating to the edges of civilization, working his small ranch with quiet determination, far from the reach of trouble. But trouble, like a persistent shadow, always found those who tried to outrun it. Ayanna was not merely another victim. She was a fierce storm wrapped in a fragile body, silent yet resolute. A Comanche woman whose spirit had been tested but never broken, her survival etched into the bruises on her skin and the fire in her eyes, that he brought her home without a word. She followed barefoot, her steps cautious yet steady, carrying wounds deeper than those visible on her skin. The silence that hung between them was thick, laden with unsaid questions, unshed tears, and a fragile hope neither dared speak aloud. The ranch, weathered and worn like its owner, became their sanctuary and prison all at once. Days slipped by in a quiet rhythm, broken only by the natural sounds of the land, the lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through dry grass, and the creak of the old gate. Words were scarce. The silence between them was a language in itself. Yet trust grew, not with grand declarations, but through the smallest acts. Caleb noticed the gate latch, once rickety, now fixed with care and precision, better than he himself could have done. His torn shirt, hanging loosely from his frame, bore neat stitches, tight and deliberate, a silent message of respect and acknowledgment. Ayanna spoke not a word, but her eyes followed him with quiet attentiveness. She listened as he muttered to the cows, whispered to the wind, and grumbled at the ache in his old knee. Their silence was not emptiness. It was a shared understanding, a delicate tension neither dared to break. The weather shifted, the first crack of lightning, the distant rumble of thunder. As the storm approached, Caleb caught the flicker of fear in Ayana's eyes. A moment of vulnerability, a glimpse of humanity beneath the armor of defiance. Together, they were no longer merely surviving. They were beginning to live. Peace in the West was a fragile thing, never given, always earned with sweat and blood. Rumors spread like wildfire. Whispers grew into threat. Garrett Sloane, the man who had sold Ayana at auction, was a man who did not forgive humiliation. One sweltering afternoon, four riders kicked up clouds of dust on the horizon. Garrett and his men rode in with cocky swagger, weapons ready, voices loud with entitlement. They believed what they claimed was theirs by right. Caleb stood his ground, rifle steady in calloused hands, eyes hard with determination. Ayana stepped forward, not with gunfire, but with a presence that thundered louder than any bullet. Her voice rang out, clear and unyielding, slicing through the tension. "I'm not yours." The men saw not fear, but two souls forged in fire, too scarred and too strong to be broken. They turned away, but the shadow of their threat lingered like a dark cloud on the horizon. Once the dust settled and danger passed, life unfolded in quiet rebellion. Ayana's garden grew wild and untamed, a living testament to resilience against harsh odds. Caleb's hands, roughened by years of toil, grew steadier as they rebuilt not just a home but something far deeper. Trust, partnership, and hope. This was more than survival. It was reclaiming humanity. The West was never about quick draws or gold rushes. It was about grit. About standing firm when every voice told you to run. About loving fiercely when love seemed impossible. As the sun sinks below the horizon, casting long shadows over their story, I ask you, what does strength mean to you? When the world pushes you down, what keeps you standing? Who stands beside you in battles no one else can see? Stories like Caleb and Ayana's remind us that courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet defiance. Sometimes it is simply refusing to be broken. If this story stirred something deep inside, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what your own story of strength looks like. And if you want more stories from the dust and winds of the West, tales of people who fought to find their way home, subscribe and stay with us. There is more to come, because the West was never just a place. It was a test of who we are when everything is taken away. And every now and then someone passes that test.